So, when you hear the name Benjamin Franklin, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For most of us, it's probably the face on the $100 bill. But the real guy, he was so much more. He was a printer, an inventor, a scientist, a diplomat, and of course, a founding father. Honestly, his life isn't just the story of one man. In a lot of ways, it's the story of America itself being born. Messy, full of contradictions, but always inventive. Okay, let's get into it.
To really understand Franklin, you've got to start right here. This is the epitaph he wrote for himself when he was just 22 years old. It's so clever, right? And it tells you everything you need to know about who he was at his core. Before all the fame, before the statesmanship, he was a printer. He saw his own life as a book, a first draft that could always be improved, always be edited. That one idea, that drive for constant self-improvement, that's the key to his whole story.
So here's our game plan. We're going to walk through his life in 6 parts. We'll start with his hustle as a tradesman, then see how he literally built the community around him. We'll follow his curiosity into the world of science, track his slow turn into a revolutionary, face some of his really complex contradictions, and then, at the end, we'll try to wrap our heads around his incredible legacy.
All right, first up, Franklin the entrepreneur. I mean, this guy is the original blueprint for the American dream, right? The idea that you can show up with basically nothing and just through pure hustle and smarts, build an entire empire. And his empire didn't start with land or some fancy title. It started with ink, paper, and a printing press.
Now, what's just wild about this is the speed. Just look at this timeline. In 4 years, just 4 years, he goes from being a runaway apprentice to owning his own print shop. Then, boom, he buys a newspaper. A couple of years later, he starts the first subscription library in America. And then he launches Poor Richard's Almanac, which was a massive hit. It made him a household name. He wasn't just working, you see. He was building an entire information network, and he put himself right at the center of it all.
And here's the kicker. Decades later, after he'd been in front of kings, after he'd helped create a whole new country, this is how he would sign his letters. B. Franklin, Printer. It wasn't false modesty. It was pride. It was him reminding everyone, and maybe himself, that everything he became was built on that foundation, the simple, powerful craft of putting words on a page.
But here's the thing about Franklin. His ambition wasn't just about himself. He took that same practical, system-building mindset and aimed it at the city he lived in. He didn't just want to live in Philadelphia. He basically wanted to invent it from the ground up.
And I mean, just look at this list. It's incredible. A debate club for making yourself and your city better, the first volunteer fire department, the first public library, a university, a hospital, even an insurance company. These aren't just little side projects. These are the fundamental building blocks of a modern city. Franklin saw a problem, and he didn't wait around for the government to fix it. He just got his friends and neighbors together and created a solution. He was a genius at grassroots innovation.
And let's just pause on this one for a second. The Pennsylvania Hospital. This wasn't just another project. This was the very first hospital in all of the American colonies. Think about that. He wasn't just improving on an idea. He was creating vital institutions that literally did not exist in America before him. Then, he took this systems thinking and went national. As postmaster, he didn't just move letters around. He totally overhauled the whole system. He made the routes more efficient, sped everything up, and made it profitable. But the really important part? He created a network that connected all these different colonies. It was the information highway of its day, letting ideas, and eventually revolutionary ideas, spread like wildfire. He was building the nervous system for a new country.
Now, with a mind that practical and curious, it's no surprise he started poking around at the natural world. He wasn't a formal, trained scientist with a fancy degree. You could almost call him an accidental scientist. He was just driven by this deep need to figure out how stuff worked, and, more importantly, how to make it work for people.
Which, of course, brings us to the famous kite experiment. The cartoon version we all know is Franklin getting zapped by a lightning bolt. Yeah, that's not what happened. The real experiment was way smarter and a lot more careful. You see, he stood under shelter to stay dry and insulated. The point wasn't to get struck. It was to let the wet kite string act like a wire, drawing the electrical charge down from the clouds to that metal key. And when a tiny spark jumped from the key to his knuckle, that was it. That was the proof. Lightning was just electricity. He had figured it out.
But man, his curiosity didn't stop there. He'd wonder, why does a wet shirt feel cool? And in figuring it out, he'd stumble on the basic principle of refrigeration. He talked to ship captains and realized that trips to Europe were way faster than trips back, so he collected all their data and became the first person to actually map the Gulf Stream. And then there are the inventions we all know, the Franklin stove, bifocals. He designed them to be, in his words, of use to mankind. And get this, he never patented a single one, because he believed inventions should benefit everyone.
Now here's a twist that might surprise you. For most of his life, Benjamin Franklin was a proud British citizen. His journey to becoming a founding father wasn't some sudden burst of patriotic fire. It was a slow, gradual, almost reluctant process. It came from years of trying and failing to make the British government understand the American point of view. He actually lived in London for years, serving as a kind of lobbyist for the colonies. And he loved England. So when Parliament passed the super unpopular Stamp Act, his first instinct wasn't to scream revolution, it was to negotiate. He tried to work within the system, to find a compromise, to make them see sense before things fell apart.
This is a quote from his testimony before Parliament in 1766, and it's an amazing moment. You have to picture it. This self-made printer from Philadelphia standing before the most powerful men in the world and just calmly schooling them with facts. He's laying it out plain as day, arguing that the colonies had already paid their dues in both money and lives. This is the moment he went from being a colonial agent to being the voice of America in London. So by the time he finally came back to Philadelphia in 1775, it was on. The war had started. The time for talking was over. He was immediately put on the Committee of Five to help draft the Declaration of Independence. As the wise old man in the room, he was the perfect editor. He made what are called small but important changes to Jefferson's draft, like his brilliant suggestion to change "we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable" to the more logical Enlightenment phrase "we hold these truths to be self-evident." Even in Revolution, he was still the printer, making the text better.
But, to really get Franklin, you have to look past the perfect resume. You have to embrace the contradictions, the messy parts, because that's what makes him feel so real, so modern, and so human.
And the most painful paradox of all was his own son. For the Franklins, the American Revolution was a literal civil war fought in their own family. While Benjamin was becoming a hero of the Revolution, his son William, the royal governor of New Jersey, stayed fiercely loyal to the king. The war completely destroyed their relationship. William ended up exiled in London, and they never really made up. For Franklin, creating a new nation meant losing his own son.
And then we have to confront the profound paradox of slavery. Early in his life, Franklin was a man of his time. He owned enslaved people, and his newspaper even ran ads for their sale. But, as you can see here, his thinking on this changed dramatically over his life. He went from being a participant in slavery to calling it an atrocious debasement of human nature. And in his final years, he became the president of America's first abolitionist society. One of his very last public acts was to petition Congress to end slavery for good. It's a really powerful story of moral growth.
So, after all this, where do we land? What's the final takeaway from this printer, inventor, scientist, and statesman? Let's try to sum up the legacy of the man they called the first American.
Well, he was the guy who proved where you came from didn't have to define who you could become. He was the civic genius who built the institutions that American society still rests on. He was the curious scientist who wasn't afraid to ask big questions, and he was the reluctant rebel who became one of the nation's most essential founders. But if you want just one fact, one stunning piece of evidence for how important he was, this is it. He is the only founding father who signed all four of the key documents that created the United States: the Declaration of Independence, the treaty that got France on our side, the peace treaty that ended the war, and the Constitution. From start to finish, at every single crucial turning point, Benjamin Franklin was there with a pen in his hand. It's funny, his own creation kind of tells his life story perfectly. He first drew this join or die cartoon to get the colonies to unite with Britain to fight the French. Years later, that very same cartoon became the ultimate symbol of the colonies uniting against Britain. Just like the man who drew it, the symbol adapted and found a new purpose for a new time.
And that leaves us with this final thought, which I think just captures him perfectly. With his wisdom, his global fame, and his steady hand guiding the American project for decades, Benjamin Franklin was, in a way, the only president of the United States who was never president of the United States. Just a printer from Philadelphia who helped create the world we live in today.